What is going on, everybody? Well, with the release of Saw X this past weekend, it is time yet again to discuss the Saw franchise. I have reviewed and ranked every single one of these movies previous to this when Spiral came out, so if you want to check out some of my older opinions or see my more expanded thoughts on every single film in this franchise, I have a review for all of them. I'll put a playlist up here. Also, this is going to be the first in a series of rankings. Because I enjoyed Saw X way more than I thought I was going to, and I have a lot more excitement to talk about this franchise than I anticipated. Not only am I going to rank the movies today, but I also plan on ranking the villains of the franchise, the twists of the different movies, as well as the traps of the franchise. So over the next 2 weeks or so, you'll see those rankings trickling out. And also, 31 on 31 this month is going to have Saw included. We're going to be doing all of the pain and suffering franchises. So you've got Saw, Hostel, Hellraiser, and Wrong Turn. And that's going to be me, the other guys in Autop Stream. That's Sean Chandler, CP from Williscredia, and Brian Lomax. And we're also going to have Rudy from Gen X Reviews as a special guest this year. So please hit the subscribe button if you enjoy this video so you do not miss all of that coming in the future. Now, it should go without saying, but never does, that this is a beloved franchise and many different, wildly different opinions out there from all the different fans of different degrees. So obviously my ranking is probably not going to line up with your ranking. It might be the exact opposite of your ranking. Just embrace the difference of opinion. Let me know your ranking down below in the comments, and we can discuss how we come to these films differently and how we got different things out of them. So starting off at number 10, the worst film in this franchise for me, honestly, my bottom two constantly kind of go back and forth for me. They're pretty much even as far as the worst, the least interesting of this franchise to me. And depending on my mood, you could ask me tomorrow and these two might swap. But as of the recording today, number 10 for me is going to be Saw 3D. Now, there is some things to be entertained by in Saw 3D. I don't think it's an absolute dumpster fire. I think some of the traps are pretty cool. I do like having Sean Patrick Flanery as kind of your lead here, the guy that is being tested. I've always liked him as an actor, and I enjoy seeing him on screen, even when he's in a movie called Nefarious. But it's a movie that does what people come to Saw films for on the most basic level, on the most just low-hanging fruit level. And it doesn't really have much outside of that. There's not really much of a compelling narrative going on. They really handicap themselves with the 3D effect, as most horror films do, because it just doesn't age well. It ages poorly from the second you walk out of the theater. And I don't know if it was because of the 3D cameras or what, but the blood and the gore in this movie has like this fluorescent pink look to it, which just totally takes you out of it. I really don't understand where that came from. If somebody knows for sure, please let me know in the comments below, because it's a burning curiosity of mine. And the main twist of this film in regards to the identity of one more apprentice, spoiler alert for every single film in this franchise, by the way. If you haven't seen all 10 of them, please don't watch. When you have Dr. Gordon that shows up in the first 5 minutes of the movie in that little Survivors Anonymous meeting, it's blatantly obvious where the movie is going to end, because the guy hasn't been around for 7 films. All of a sudden, he randomly shows back up, and he's all cryptic and stoic and dark, not like he was in the first film at all. It's like, okay, obviously he's an apprentice. Thanks for showing your hand like a motherfucker on that one, guys. So yeah, when you get to the little end and you get the whole Hello Zep music going, it's like, I wonder who's going to be behind this pig mask. So yeah, this movie is not very good at all. But if you're in a Saw mood, there's worst movies in other franchises for sure. Coming in just above that by a razor-thin margin is Saw 5. I find Saw 5 to be among the most boring in this franchise, and that's kind of the kiss of death when you're watching a movie like this, for it to be bored. So Saw 5, the only thing that puts it above Saw 3D, just barely for me, is the cast of characters that we get that are doing the game. Like the group of people where they're supposed to work together, and one by one they screw each other over, get to the end and realize, oh shit, we should have worked together, we could have survived this. You got Julie Benz and a number of other character actors that I've always liked. So I like that segment of the movie. I don't like the whole Strom versus Hoffman thing. I don't really care much for Hoffman as a character at all. You'll probably hear me repeat that a couple of times in this ranking. Strom is an okay enough character, but not compelling enough for me to really care too much about his fate. And once you get into the Hoffman side of the movies, I think the entire lure and luster of the moral question of, is Jigsaw correct, and how he's trying to teach people, that's just thrown out, and it's just about murdering people in the most visceral and disgusting ways possible in traps that are basically unwinnable. So from Saw 4 onward, that kind of is a problem for me. And so Saw 5, the two narratives of Strom versus Hoffman and these group of people are completely separated. They don't really tie into each other at all, narratively or even thematically. And so it just leads to be a movie that is easily forgettable in this franchise, and I don't particularly enjoy rewatching. Coming in at number 8 is going to be Saw 4, in competition for Saw 5 as the most forgettable and boring movie in this franchise. This was the first one after Jigsaw had been killed off, and this was the first movie that I did not immediately go out and see when it came out. I was right on the money with the first 3 Saw films. I saw the first one, was blown away by it, saw the second one, loved it, saw the third one, really liked it. But after the ending of that movie, it kind of felt like, okay, we're done here. Like, what else can you do? And so Saw 4 came out, and I just didn't really have much interest in even watching it in theaters. It took me a long time to watch it on home video. And when I finally did, I was kind of like, yeah, this just feels like they're just keeping going for the sake of going. It doesn't feel like there's really much else to tell here. It's just a big movie that's kind of waiting to drop the shoe of who is going to be the successor of Jigsaw now that Amanda is dead. And then the answer is Hoffman, one of my least favorite characters in this franchise. And the central game that you're following is like a C-level character from Saw 2 and 3 as he goes through and he's being tested on how he won't let people save themselves, I guess, and he's just too anxious to help other people, and he like breaches doors without approval, and it's just starting to get to the point where it's like, does this really merit death? I mean, like, beyond this, like, what is it? Like, you took my Starbucks order, so I want to play a game. You're going to fucking die. Like, it just gets ridiculous at this point. So this is a movie that, of all of the movies in the franchise, I probably struggle to remember specific details about it the most without rewatching it, and that's not a good thing to say about your movie. Coming in at number 7 is going to be Saw 6, another movie in this franchise that I'm not particularly a big fan of. This seems to be kind of a fan favorite, which has always been odd to me. You always hear people, at least in the Hoffman movies, really defend Saw 6, and I don't quite get it. I mean, it's at the top of those list of movies for me, so I guess to a certain degree I understand people liking this more than the others, but not to the degree that I've seen it be hailed and defended. To me, this one is interesting because Hoffman is full psycho mode, so he's like straight up murdering people in his office, and he's just, the tension is at its highest as far as him about to be getting caught or getting killed in this situation, so that makes it a little more interesting to watch his character in panic mode. And then you get a game to where you have this insurance guy, this insurance executive that has denied many people and led them to their deaths. And that's, to a certain degree, something that I think you could easily emotionally manipulate people into kind of being along the ride with. At the same time, it's yet again, it's like, does that really... The things that he did are not commendable whatsoever. But Jesus Christ, like the carousel where he's got to shoot all of his other employees and stuff. It's just, again, the Hoffman movies lose sight of the actual lessons being taught and lessons being learned, and it's just about punishing people. And so I just don't really get much interest or joy out of that, just watching people get mutilated for 90 minutes. And that's essentially what this is yet again. So it's interesting enough. Like, this one, I think, has the most going for it of the Hoffman set of films, that second half of the original run of films, but it's still not a movie that I ever really remember too much specifically about without rewatching, and it's not a movie I ever am in the mood to rewatch. So that's why it's low. This also began the point, as somebody that is not a fan of the character of Hoffman, to where it started to get really annoying how much he just continuously gets away scot-free. He stands up in Saw 4, hey, I'm the new apprentice. He gets away a couple of times in Saw 5 and gets over on Strom. And then this one, he literally gets put into the reverse bear trap by Jigsaw's ex-wife and somehow manages to squeeze his way out of that in a pretty nasty looking injury for sure. But again, it's just, you get to the end of it and you're like, fucking really? Another movie with this guy? We've got more movies focusing on Hoffman than we do focusing on Jigsaw at this point. Why? Coming in at number 6 for me is Jigsaw, a movie that I don't necessarily think is a great film by any means, but I've always been surprised at the level of hate that has been hailed at it, because the more I talk to Saw fans and casual Saw fans and diehards, Jigsaw and Spiral tend to be at the bottom of their lists, which just puzzle me. So Jigsaw was the first time that this franchise kind of tried to reboot itself. It was a number of years after Saw 3D when the franchise was supposedly done. And then all of a sudden they were teasing this big return to form with Jigsaw. And even in the trailers and everything, it was kind of teasing the return of Tobin Bell. The entire movie is very manipulative for fans into thinking somehow they're going to bring Tobin Bell back. And it might be stupid, but what are they going to do to bring Jigsaw back into the fold after he's been dead for a number of years? And then it turns out to be like this timeline switching twist, just like with Saw 2, to where you're watching the events of something that happened 10 years ago, and that's why Jigsaw is there alive and, well, I would say alive and well, but alive and not so well. And that just feels really cheap and manipulative at that point, to be like, okay, we're going to come back, you're going to tease the fans, and then you're going to do this again. And then the twist beyond that is that there's yet another secret apprentice that was there all along, even before Amanda and before Hoffman and before Dr. Gordon. He's like the OG apprentice who we've never met before, never heard of before, and was one of the most obvious red herrings in the movie. Again, we've done this before. How many fucking apprentices does this guy have? How many people is he winning over with this murderous game of morality? It was ridiculous. So that side of it I understand. However, I do think it's one of the better directed films in the franchise. I do think that it works well as a standalone movie that you could pop on and not feel the need to watch the preceding 7 movies to get into it and to understand it. And I do think that it's an easier watch than some of the films that I have below this that are just so overly convoluted and complicated with lore and timelines and flashbacks and twists. And it's a movie that I tend to have an easier experience rewatching. And so for that reason, it's a little bit higher on my list than some people. I think that it's not nearly as bad as people make it out to be. It was just one of the many times where they just kept stretching things out for the sake of stretching it out. And that's my biggest annoyance with it. Now, from here on up, these are all movies that I would say I genuinely like in this franchise. And coming in at number 5 is going to be Saw 3. Now, Saw 3 was a movie that this was the point where it felt like, okay, this is a good place to end this franchise. Like, the story has come to its natural end here. You pulled off a couple more good twists and you wrap things up at a pretty nasty little bow. And this is good. This is a good place to stop the story of Jigsaw. And obviously it did not do that. And the people that are lining their pockets with the money that this franchise gave are probably laughing at me saying that. But narratively, this felt like a good place to end because it was still a very solid Saw film to me. You have Jigsaw yet again being not necessarily the forefront, but he gets a good bit of screen time. And you have Amanda there and a bit of an expansion on their relationship and the complications of their relationship. And you have this really interesting game. Besides Jeff being a really dull character, you have an interesting game here to where this man who has lost a lot and has a lot of reasons to be angry at the world and to be vengeful at people is being taught to forgive. And I think it's one of the more successful games at actually bringing the lesson full circle by the end of it. So I enjoy how the main narrative with Jigsaw and Amanda and his brain surgery and the doctor that is held captive ties in with the Jeff game and that narrative, and it all comes to a really nice full circle by the end of it. So I think this is a pretty successful Saw film. At the same time, it's by this point, which is why I was like, this is a good place to end. 3 movies in, that was enough for me at the time. It was like, okay, this Saw thing is cool, but you've kind of run its course with how serious I can take all of this. And, this still had some of the issues to where some of the logic as far as who is getting punished and who is put into this game is just very spotty for how moral Jigsaw seems to see himself. I mean, if you have Jeff, who is the person in the wrong and the person who needs to be taught lessons, and the people that did horrific things that are in this game that are part of his lesson. But you also have his wife, who is innocent, who is held captive and more or less sentenced to death if Jeff fails his test. And it's just like, okay, at what point do you hold yourself responsible for killing innocent people to teach other people a lesson? Like, is the juice really worth the squeeze at that point? I don't know. That's a question that you can't ask too seriously in these movies. Otherwise, you'll just start picking them apart. But it's always been something that has bugged me about most of these films. And Saw 3 is certainly one of the ones where I have some of the bigger question marks. Coming in at number 4 is Spiral from the Book of Saw. And this is another movie like Jigsaw that I genuinely don't understand the hate for it. I can understand having some issues with it. The film certainly has its fair share of issues that I'll get into, but To me, this does the best job at getting back to the setup and the tone and the feel of the first film and kind of having that very much inspired by Seven vibe to it. And I really enjoyed that. So you have Chris Rock and you have Samuel L. Jackson as kind of the two big stars that are leading this one, much more Chris Rock. And I really enjoy both of them as talents, whether you're talking about Chris Rock's stand-up or Samuel L. Jackson's just massively successful movie career. I love both of those guys. And the fact that you have it back to like this detective story that is focused primarily on one character, and there's a mystery there about who the killer is and what the motivation is and what exactly is the lesson they're trying to be, they're trying to teach all of these people. I like the spin that they had where they took kind of the formula and the game aspect of Saw and Jigsaw, the John Kramer's games, and applied it to police brutality, because this came out in a time where, you know, Black Lives Matter and all that was very much a heavy conversation. And I think they did a good job at bringing that into the story and making it feel like it was making a solid statement without overstating anything, without being too heavy-handed or being really preachy. And that's such a tight rope to walk, and I think they walked it really well. The traps were pretty gnarly. I think it was well directed and had some really good camera work and everything into it. The negatives with the film is that I feel like Chris Rock, his performance is two halves, where he is kind of the laid back, kind of, you know, cracking jokes detective. I think he does really well. I think that his stand-up personality comes out, and I really believe his character and like his character as a lead in those moments. And then there's times where he has to be like this grizzled, hard-boiled detective, and I think his performance is terrible in those moments. And I love Chris Rock, no disrespect to him, but it just feels so forced. I mean, even just scenes where he's not even talking. It's just the face, like where he's walking towards that car, and he's just got this grizzled look on him, and it's like, dude, that's not you. That's not you. You're really forcing it. You know, he wanted to do this. This was more or less an idea that came to fruition because of Chris Rock's interest. The producers of the film were already basically working on the concept that eventually became Saw X, and then Chris Rock went to either Lionsgate or the producers with a pitch for a new modern Saw film because he wanted to kind of get into the horror franchise or the horror genre and kind of rejuvenate his career a little bit, do something different. And his ideas mixed with a script that the producers were already working on kind of mixed together and became Spiral. And while I like the ideas and I like the gestation of the idea that came into this movie, I just don't feel like Chris Rock was the best fit for that character, at least not the way that he played it. If he had leaned more into the stand-up comedy side, I think it would have balanced out the movie a bit more and I would have believed it more. The other negative is that this is one of the most obvious twists in the entire franchise. You basically have this situation to where every single time they find a dead body or the remains of one of these cops that has been tested and punished, they then show you the trap. They show you the person going through this process and eventually getting killed. And then you get to one where it's the brand new rookie who's been the partner with Chris Rock the entire film, and they just see this skinned body with the tattoo, which leads them to believe that it's him, and then they never show you the trap. So immediately you tip off the audience, okay, well, this is bullshit, so obviously it's him. And so 45 minutes through the film, you know where it's heading, and that's extremely disappointing for a Saw film because the twists, the best twists in this franchise tend to really bring the movie home, and this one was just like, yeah, no shit, we've known that for going on an hour now. Thanks for showing your hand so hard on that one. This and Saw 3D are in competition for like the most obvious just twist reveals. So that's a disappointment. But other than that, I think this is a solid movie. I think that it does a really good job at being a standalone film that you don't have to watch the other Saw films for. And yet, if you are a Saw film, there's enough here that is very much the Saw movies baked into the DNA that it feels like a part of this franchise and not so foreign. And yet it has a lot of unique ideas and a lot of unique directions that make it feel a bit fresh, which I desperately needed from a Saw film at that point. So I like this one a lot more than most. Coming in at number 3 is going to be the OG Saw. And I'm always torn when I rank this movie because I feel like I rank it higher more so for the legacy and the respect of what it accomplished and the kicking off this massively successful franchise and these iconic characters more than I actually rank it on my enjoyment of the film. This was a movie that I loved when I first saw it because it was just so different and cool. I was like, holy shit, this is wild. And then, you know, by the time 2 and 3 came around, I was a big fan and then started to kind of drop off a bit. But over the years, as I rewatched this movie, I feel like its flaws show more as time goes on. And so you have obviously the respects to pay to it is that it's an extremely low budget film from essentially two people who were like student filmmakers at that point with James Wan and Lee Winnell. And they just exploded onto the scene. James Wan has gone on to be a massively successful director. Lee Winnell took a lot longer to kind of break out, but has a very respectable directing career in his own right. And I think by the time all said and done, he might even be more successful than James Wan in certain ways, but time will tell. And the story concept here is really cool, is really interesting. And I think that the style of the movie, the directing style, and just the way that they bring a lot of influences and a lot of their own unique flavor here is really commendable. However, I don't feel like the movie is as interesting on rewatch because you have the two people stuck in the bathroom in the game, you have some detectives, you have different timelines all brought together, and so it kind of feels a little bit scattered when I watch it on rewatch nowadays. And one of the biggest things that hurts it for me is that I don't really care for either of the performances of the guys that are in the bathroom. Lee Winnell, I don't fault him for it. He was a brand new person to the industry. He was a writer, had never really acted before that I know of. And so he did his best and he's okay, but you can tell he's an inexperienced actor that was cast in that role probably because of budget reasons. Cary Elwes is an actor that many people love and adore, mostly for Princess Bride and among some other things. He's one of those actors that everything that I have ever seen him in, I don't like his performance. He always brings down the movie for me. I don't have anything hate for the guy. It's not like he's done something to me personally, but we all have one or two of those people that just every time they're on screen, they just kind of take you out of the movie. And aside from his goofy ass role in Liar Liar, every time I've seen Cary Elwes in a movie, he just brings it down for me. And I think his performance in this movie is god awful, especially in the third act when he's supposed to be really overly emotional and he's crying on the phone and then it's horrible. And so every single time that it goes back to his character and Lee Winnell's character, which is a lot of this movie, it just drags me down. And the more that I watch the movie, the more I dislike Cary Elwes' performance especially. So it's a movie that I definitely like. I'll always have some nostalgia for it. I'll always respect it for what it accomplished. But it's not this instant horror classic, greatest of all time movie for me, and probably never will be. Coming in at number 2 is going to be Saw 2. This has always been my favorite of this franchise. As much as I liked Saw when I first saw it, when I saw Saw 2, I was like, holy shit, they did everything that I liked about the first one, but better. There was no weird, wacky performances that dragged the movie down. I enjoyed Donnie Wahlberg as kind of the central focus of the movie. I think that he does good in his character. And even though he's not necessarily a good guy, there's things about him that make you sympathize and identify with him and kind of root for him to get through this situation. And you understand the decisions that he makes out of desperation, out of fatherhood. And at the same time, you get way more Tobin Bell, way more Jigsaw in this movie, which was such a welcome addition after him just being, kind of talked about, and you hear his voice and then he just stands up as the twist in the end of the first one. Getting him to be more of a prominent character was great. And we'll talk about that again here in a few minutes. I think that the traps were a big step up from the first film. There's more of them. They're a lot gnarlier. You have the Venus flytrap. You have the whole needle pit that Amanda gets thrown into, which to this day I think is still the one that makes people squirm the most. The whole setup of these people in this house with all these traps and the way that they've displaced time to be the twist to where Donnie Wahlberg's son has actually already escaped and he's alive and well. And if he just sits there and talks with Jigsaw, he'll be returned to him. But he's watching these monitors as if it's real live, and he starts to get more and more anxious about his son's fate. I just think it's a really well executed movie. I think the twist and everything about it is more impactful than the first film, which some people think is sacrilege, but honestly, I just always felt it was a better experience. So there's not really anything that I can think of right now that's like a big glaring negative about this movie. Like Saw movies in general are never going to be among my favorites of all time. That's always going to be kind of a holdback on my enjoyment of it. But as far as a Saw experience, Saw 2 delivers damn near a perfect one. But coming in at number 1, what may end up being the biggest surprise of 2023, Saw X. I never would have expected to walk out of this film and not only really like it, but also say that it's the best of the franchise. Like, I can't tell you how much I was glad to eat my words as I walked out of that secret screening at Fantastic Fest. I was such a naysayer of this movie. I was such a negative opinion on it for understandable reasons. I stand by the fact that they earned my negativity by this point. But even my trailer reaction, you can look at the thumbnail and I'm like, same old shit. Because the trailer, like, it showed that Jigsaw was going to be more of a prominent piece of the movie, but I wasn't sold on how much they were actually going to use him there. And then you had the traps and the other setup, and I was just like, this feels like just another Saw movie. It feels like they're just going back to the first couple of movies, and I really enjoyed Spiral, so I was a little disappointed we weren't following up on that one, and we were rebooting and starting again, yet again. And so it just felt like desperation to me. The whole thing reeked of desperation and just wanting more money and doing whatever they can to appeal to fans to get more money. And then I walked into this secret screening, not expecting much. It was actually my least interesting possibility of what the secret screening could have been. Watched this film and walked out and said, holy shit, that was awesome. I was genuinely surprised pleasantly how much of a focus we get on Jigsaw as a character. He's not only the focus of the movie, he's the protagonist, and they frame it in a way to where even though we know this guy is a murdering, evil, whacked up son of a bitch, and even in this video, I've talked about how his moral code is just so fucking weird and wacky and just bullshit that I don't even buy into it really. And they really succeed at making you sympathize with him and wanting to see his victory and rooting for him to take out these other people. And they really succeeded in that, where movies like Don't Breathe 2 didn't succeed at all for me. And that was a surprising achievement. And they just frame him as this sad, hopeless old man that gets the last little bit of life just ripped away from him by these con artists. And it frames it in a way to where when he finally comes to the point where he's putting them in these traps and trying to test them, you're like, yep, test the fuck out of him, Jigsaw. I don't care if they make it or not. Fuck those people. And that was just a really cool way to do it. And that's another thing that they've never really done before in this franchise, is making you genuinely hate the people that go into these traps before we see them. Usually you find out what they did by the end of the film, and kind of setting it up to where we know that before they go in reframes what's the traditional Saw experience in a way that was just so much more satisfying for me. The traps and the gore, I think, were all really solid. I think that it was painful and nasty enough without going too gratuitous. And at the same time, it was, besides being maybe a little over the top with the logic of how these people are able to maim themselves to that degree without just passing out from shock, it was fitting to their crimes thematically enough to where I enjoyed it and can kind of forgive that. And it was just a really good experience. It was a good story. And when I come to a Saw film, this delivered everything that I wanted and all the things that I have kind of given up on even expecting from a Saw film. So I am all 100% on board for whatever they want to do in continuing, which they are going to be doing more movies in this Saw X timeline. There are certain things that are left open by the end of this film intentionally so that they can follow it up with a Saw X2 or whatever the hell they're going to call it. And I'm fully on board. And not since Saw 2, the original Saw 2, have I ever been in a point where I'm telling you I'm excited for the future of Saw. And just a couple more things. Like, I was even surprised by the sense of humor that the movie had. There's this really dark, self-aware sense of humor that the film has that both kind of pokes fun and is kind of a sideways acknowledgement of how bullshit Jigsaw's moral code is, and a few other things that were just got really big laughs out of the theater. Something else I've never really had the experience with in Saw films is genuine laughs. And for as much as I genuinely didn't care that they teased Amanda's return in the trailer, I actually think they did some really necessary character development and relationship development between her and Jigsaw that adds a lot more to the journey that she goes on from Saw 1 to Saw 3. And I think by the time they're done with this new run of films, I think her character in particular, her journey from the first film to eventually her death in Saw 3 is going to feel like much more fleshed out and much more of an earned character arc. And I'm excited to see that. I'm excited to see what they do to complete that. So all in all, guys, yeah, I did not expect to be gushing about Saw X over multiple videos, but yeah, I genuinely had a great time with this movie, and I was excited to tell everybody how much I enjoyed it. And these are the times where I love to eat my words, because it gets all of you even more excited for a film that you were much more optimistic about than me. So if you haven't seen Saw X, definitely check it out. Even if you were kind of spotty on the Saw franchise, I would encourage you to give this one a shot and see if it has something here that maybe you liked more than the other films. And it has ended up my #1 Saw film. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, please click over here for all my other 2023 new release reviews so far. I'm also going to put the playlist up here of all of my Saw reviews. You can get my thoughts much more in depth of all 10 of these films. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss all those rankings coming in the future. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.